Welcome to the Gottesdienst crowd, where we foster confessional integrity, liturgical preservation, and preaching that doesn't stink. We believe that the historic liturgy of the divine service is more than mere cobwebs of antiquity, but it is a true treasure of the Church, to be dusted off and brought down from her attic to be enjoyed. So let's get dusting.
Welcome back to the Gottesdienst crowd. This is Jason Broughton. Today we have back with us Dave Peterson. Welcome back, Dave.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We are looking at the Gospel reading for the fourth Sunday of Easter. It comes from John chapter 16, verses 16 to 22. I will read that in the New King James. Jesus said, "A little while, and you will not see me, and again a little while, and you will see me, because I go to the Father." Then some of his disciples said among themselves, "What is this that he says to us? A little while, and you will not see me, and again a little while, and you will see me, and because I go to the Father." They said, therefore, "What is this that he says to us? A little while, we do not know what he is saying." Now Jesus knew that they desired to ask him, and he said to them, "Are you inquiring among yourselves about what I said? A little while, and you will not see me, and again a little while, and you will see me. Most assuredly, I say to you, that you will weep and lament, but the world will rejoice, and you will be sorrowful, but your sorrow will be turned into joy. A woman, when she is in labor, has sorrow because her hour has come. But as soon as she has given birth to the child, she no longer remembers the anguish for joy that a human being has been born into the world. Therefore, you now have sorrow, but I will see you again, and your heart will rejoice, and your joy no one will take from you." All right. Obviously, this is, in that farewell discourse, kind of Luther's comments that this is his final sermon to the disciples in order to encourage them and embolden them,
Right.
give them strength for what is coming. How else does he handle this?
Luther?
Yeah.
Well, he really, this is like a kind of a heavy psychological kind of burden for Luther, I would say. He talks about there being various kinds of sorrow, and the greatest sorrow is to think that Christ has abandoned you, to give in to despair. Again, you sort of see that for Luther, the greatest danger is despair. It's, I think, almost seems very likely that Luther suffered from despair, maybe clinical depression, but and the like. So ultimately, that's what he talks about, is how is it that a Christian can learn to live with the disappointments and the difficulties of this life and believe that Jesus lives and loves him. And he sees this as talking about that directly. And his answer, I think, is quite well said and quite nicely done and good advice. And that is that, here, I'll read you a sentence here from page 213 in volume 77 of the American edition of Luther's works. "God mingles and mixes things on the earth so that those who should by right rejoice must have much suffering and sorrow, while on the other hand, those who should be sorrowful have joy and good days." And I think that's just a kind of realistic admonishment and recognition that there's nothing good in this world that's perfectly good. And so everything is sort of mingled in a sense with some sort of disappointment or less than the ideal and less than it should be. But at the same time, right, when we're in the sort of throes of difficulties and we're sort of, whether that's kind of obsessive thinking or, what's the, I can't think of the word for it right now, where you're just obsessed. You keep thinking about the same thing over and over again. I want to call it remunerate. I can't remember. Anyway, where you can't, let go of something. And then everything becomes sort of this negative and catastrophized. we do need to learn to stop, take a deep breath, and look for goodness and beauty. Mm-hmm. Because when you're Job and all your children are dead and your wife's dead and your friends are all telling you all these terrible things and you're covered with sores, there's still beauty in the world. And you do need to learn to look to see it and to express gratitude for it and to receive it in kind of piety. And I think that's an important and significant lesson, that to have faith means to cultivate. It's not passive completely, right? It's not just God makes us believers and then that's it. We are called to engage in these things and to actually cultivate gratitude, joy, right? Make a joyful noise unto the Lord. That's the intro antiphon for today. That's a command. So we have to learn to do this when it's not easy. And we have to expect there's going to be plenty of times. So Luther's thing ultimately, of course, then is, very kind of law gospel-y thing, right? We're gonna believe in the promises of God because he said them. And there is joy that's coming eventually, that we're eager for, but there is also joy now. So he's almost at the very penultimate paragraph, he says, I must learn to cling with faith to the words that Christ says, a little while. And Luther doesn't bring this up, or maybe he does, I don't remember. But as I was, working on this morning, I think the word mikron in Greek is so little, which I love this because it's microscopic. So the little of little while sounds really little, right? A tiny little bit that you're going to have to, it's like the doctor's going to give you a shot. This is going to hurt, right? It's not going to last long. It doesn't actually hurt that bad, right? The sort of terror about what's going to happen is way worse than the actual shot. And, you are going to have these things, but I think the reason he repeats this so much, and the emphasis here is, it's just a little while. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's actually a promise, right? This isn't going to last. Yes, this sucks. Your husband is dead. You're very sad. You're lonely. And I know he's been dead for 7-8 years, right? And you got a lot of life ahead of you. And that seems like a long time, but it isn't actually. It's actually just a little while. And it's going to be over very soon. And that's a hopeful statement, right?
For sure. So what is it in our expectations that we kind of jumble all this up? Is it because we, as God's people, know what it ought to be, and that knowledge distorts what we experience on a daily basis?
Well, that's a very pious explanation. I don't think so. Okay. I think it's pride. I think it's just impatience. We just want... it's just
it can be a mixed bag, can it?
To be sure. But I do think there's just an awful lot of kind of double standard pride in us that just wants everyone else to be perfect, but then to put up with all of our problems and weaknesses. Most of our frustrations in this world, I think, are people-based, right? Mostly what I'm mad about is not that, roses have thorns, though I don't like that either. But, most of the time when I'm grousing or I'm obsessing and, just stuck on these things, it's usually people. It's not usually, that dog was mean, right? So I think it's the things that really get to us are mostly people-based, and it's mostly a kind of arrogance on our part that wants people to be, and covetous, frankly, right? And it's pretty gross when you start to really analyze and think about it. You could just sort of think to the last time that you were annoyed or bored with your wife. I mean, how in the world is that even possible for you, Jason?
For real. She's...
for any of us.
She keeps me on my toes. That's for ding dang sure.
And so, but I mean, seriously, like we should, we have so much to be thankful for. I mean, how in the world is there anybody in this world that loves us that puts up with us, that wants what's good for us, that's kind to us, that, and then it's like, oh, she told a long story from her hairdresser and I was bored by it. I mean, God, how dare I? It's outrageous. So I think,
that is one of the most difficult things, at least for me. I mean, not hearing those stories necessarily, but staying in the moment with any person.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I'm always thinking about what I need to do next instead of. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No. Terribly, but yes.
It's so horrible.
I know. Right. Or thinking about what you're right. I'm bored listening to you talk. I'm just waiting for my turn. Kind of thing. It's horrible.
I don't talk that much, so I'm not nearly as talkative as Lauren is, but typically I have things to do, and then when I start doing those things, I wish I were talking to her.
Right.
It's so horrible. I mean, it's just so awful.
Yeah. The flesh is never satisfied. This is the problem. I mean, the flesh it doesn't really know what it wants. It's like the devil, right? The devil, and you have that in Romans 1, where the debasement is to give them over to their own desires, and then this didn't quite work out the way I thought it would.
Yeah,
and so I think mostly our dissatisfaction from this world is really arrogant, and I don't think it's because we've seen the most beautiful thing in the beatific vision, and now, we can't settle for anything less. I think it's that, if we really gazed upon the beatific vision, it would actually color the way we saw everything else, and we would be far more satisfied with it. If you looked into your child's eyes and actually saw, this human being that God had created and bestowed upon the world as a gift, for whom Jesus died, that wouldn't make you dissatisfied with his imperfections. That would make you, love him. So
what is this sorrow? Because it comes up it's one of the translations in the Septuagint for the curses given to Adam and Eve. And sometimes it's translated sorrow, but sometimes as pain. So how should we understand this sorrow? Does it encapsulate not just the physical, but also kind of the mental, spiritual thing?
Oh yeah, I think the emphasis is on the latter.
You do?
Yeah, I've been pretty influenced by Thomas Aquinas, I guess. I really like the language of sorrow or sadness as being a spiritual or mental pain that comes from a lack, right? So it's this sense that it's this sadness because something is wrong in the world. Now that could be, my leg is missing, but the real pain, I think the real pain is always mental. Or, I don't want to downplay the physical realities of things. We're not, Platonists, but we are primarily spiritual mental beings, more so than we are corporeal, at least in the sense of that which is most essential to us and which matters the most. And we've done this on here before, but the sort of, thought experiment, which I'm borrowing from Peter Kreeft is, would you rather that your wife, be alive and have her mind, but be cut off from the waist down, right? Or be perfectly physically healthy, but not able to talk to you? And the truth is, to be able to talk to you is what you actually love about her the most and what matters, her companionship, right? So we're not in any way. So I think the word sorrow here, both in Genesis and here, has to do more with the mental and spiritual sadness that is brought about by sin in the world and all these kinds of brokenness, more than the physical. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, so then how do we understand that with regard to the curses given to Adam and Eve?
Well, the problem is that they cannot receive these things, right? First of all, there's actual consequences of their actions that create lack the garden doesn't produce fruit the way that it used to, and it requires more effort, and then its products aren't as great as they were. So there is that lack, and there's also, of course, droughts and bugs and thorns and all the things that go with it. So, but the problem is that I think the pain of that for them is not so much that they're starving to death or that their food isn't interesting enough, but rather that they are distant from God and they don't trust Him to provide everything that they need. So in this way, I'm with Luther on the, he sees this as being the kind of greater sorrow, right? So in this sense, I don't think Jesus has any of that kind of sorrow, right? In that he never, even when he says on the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? He's not doubting God's word and promise, right?
Yeah. But he is the man of sorrows and acquainted with grief.
Yeah. Well,
So is he? So in light of all of that, and I didn't look up that Isaiah passage to see if that's the word that it's used.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
All right, so it's not the same word.
Well, there's still, I would say anyway, whether it's the same word or not, he is acquainted through these sorrows, weirdly vicariously, right, through us. He endures all the lacks, all the deficiencies of this world, all the violences and injustices of this world, but he does so without ever disbelieving in God's promises. But he sees, this has got to be what causes compassion in him, right? Why he groans in frustration over the sin in the world, because we are unnecessarily, right, hurting ourselves and making things worse and kind of refusing his gifts. Think of the frustration he has with the children of Israel during the Exodus, or at any point, right? But that's where it's the most pointed in a way. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that's the curse, right? To have that, it's not just, again, so it's like, the part of the curse, to be sure, is that babies die, right? Mm-hmm. In pain, there's childbirth is dangerous, and to the mother and to the child. And then, like the first son by Bathsheba of David dies. And certainly that's a sorrow. But the kind of lesson there from David is to learn that he can go where the baby has gone, and that the baby has been relieved, and to actually place the baby into God's hands and to trust in him. And insofar as the Holy Spirit enables and gives David the courage and the faith to do that, David has the peace that passes all understanding. And insofar as David's own flesh gets in the way and rebels against the reality and says, this sucks and I'm mad and I want it the way that I imagined would have been better, then David has sorrow. Mm-hmm. Right? And I'm not in any way, this is not easy, right? This is the struggle of faith. And this is exactly the situation the apostles are in, right? They're looking at Jesus about to go to the cross and they're saying, man, this sucks. Mm-hmm. This is not the way it should be. This is not the way we envisioned it. We have other possibilities that we think would be better. No, you're wrong. And God is providing, and he does know what he's doing, and he is, right? And this is the lesson, to live by faith and to endure these hardships and trust in God's goodness. This is the ultimate thing. And it's not something that on this side of glory we can fully, obviously, enjoy, but we still have to learn the lesson, and we still have to repent, and we still have to, keep kind of working at it in that sense.
Mm-hmm. So in Genesis 3, I always kind of took the, in pain you shall bring forth children, as something beyond just the giving birth.
Oh, yeah.
Like the actual raising. But in what Jesus says, it seems different.
Well, I think because he's not denying that there's more pain to come, with this
Right.
baby. It's just that in that moment, she realizes what's actually real and what's beautiful. So here's the other thing I think in this text, besides this emphasis upon how little, the little while, and again, of course, it doesn't feel little in the
No.
moment to anyone. And it isn't, it isn't little either if it's judged by any kind of human standards. But it is little from the divine standard, and that's the position of faith, and that's the position we're taking because we want to be like Jesus and we want to take his words literally and believe what he says. But so that little thing. But then the other side of this is, I love this, is that this example is not arbitrary. Like he's just like, oh, let me think of an example where somebody was sad and then it passed and then he felt okay, right? No, this is the example of the human experience. This is the central reality of being a human, is giving birth, right? This is what human beings are created for, to be fruitful and to multiply and to be engaged in the image of God in life and bringing life forth. And there is the sense in which, in fact, I think this is related, this will get a little weird maybe, but I think this is related to sexual purity, that a woman's womb is the most sacred space in the universe, because it is the belly of life, right? And it is where God does this marvelous thing, and why women deserve this kind of extra honor, respect and treatment. So yeah, there's more. You're right. I think that the pain of childbirth is not just the physical danger and difficulty that she's going to heal from. Mostly, that's the other thing, right?
Yeah,
it's mostly. So she is going to heal from this, God willing, and for that healing, we thank God, but it's not complete. And then the other thing is there's more pain to come, because this little sinner is not going to behave himself, and he is going to bring trials and pains and humiliation upon his mother. And teach her what it is to sacrifice herself for others. And in that, he's a gift to her. But it will be crosses. And it doesn't, it doesn't end either. That's the thing to me. I'm at the point in my life where I'm like, how is this still, why are my adult children still causing me problems? I'm sure they'd probably say, and vice versa. But
that's right.
It is kind of amazing how that, even though they have departed, from their mother and father and are cleaving now to their spouses, there's that, it is a strange bond. And, it's different. But you're still wrapped up in it, And again, this is the reason that I think this is so central to who we are meant to be, depending on the crosses that we've been given, because obviously there's crosses of being barren and celibate and other sorts of things, but or also, even more sadly, really, crosses that have come through violence and death. But this is the kind of central reality, and it continues then to teach us to live by faith and to realize, well, okay, so this is, and I think this is kind of a typical story. I remember when our first son was born, he was very compliant. He was a very easy baby, and we really thought we knew what we were doing. And
that is so true.
Then, and boy, does the carpet get pulled out from underneath you sometimes. And
yes,
it's kind of amazing, how the things that you learn and the kind of, when you look back at stuff, it's, and I don't know anybody who has children who, and I mean, by the time they're 5 or 6, you already realize that you have a lot of regrets, right? About how you did things and what you could have done and what you should have done I think that things that haunt our people the most, they're children who have left the faith. It's just one of the most difficult and painful and very common realities that we deal with. And the other thing is, even if their children haven't left the faith, their children's sorrows that they typically see seeds of in their childhood that they didn't address appropriately. I wish I would have made my kid do more chores because he doesn't seem to have a work ethic, and I just gave in because it was too hard. Or, I think I was too hard on him and made him do too many chores. You can't, it's so difficult not to look back and try to analyze and figure out where it went wrong. And And maybe there's a little bit of value in doing that, and maybe there's things to apologize and ask for forgiveness from our children. So I don't want to dismiss it completely, but at the same time, we have got to learn to place these children into God's hands and to trust Him, right? And
so
to recognize.
How do you do that?
Well, I don't think it's like any of these things. It's not like this is so easy. I mean, I'm saying it. It's not like it's not like a baby dies and we just go, well, I'm just like King David. Everything's fine. I know I'll go to him. I mean, I want to do that. And I think we're supposed to do that. But I mean, that takes decades, decades of sorrow, decades of wrestling with God in prayer and reading His Word and crying out in anguish. I mean, this is not an easy, slow thing, and there will be good days and bad days, and there will be seasons, and it'll wax and it'll wane. But this is the reality. We believe that God is working all things together for good, that He actually does love us, and He knows what He's doing. Mm-hmm. And so I think part of this is the same sort of thing. It's, you know what? He made you that kid's mother. He knew what you were like. He knew what the kid was like. He decided to assign the kid to you. You're only a steward. You're not really the kid's mother. And I mean, in some sense. And so we have to kind of learn to trust and believe in this, that he will take care of His children. And He took care of His children through you. And you screwed it up because of laziness, selfishness, confusion, weakness, whatever. God knew that. Mm-hmm. And he's still working, and He's still blessed it. And you know what? It was good for you, and it was good for the kid, and it was good for your husband, and it was good for your grandmother, and it's good for the world. And I think we have to just believe what the Bible says. I mean, so it's the advice is so obvious and so simple, and yet in our fallen flesh so hard. So I think you just have to keep on keeping on in a way. Mm-hmm. And again, I think it's helpful to learn to look for beauty, to cultivate gratitude, to actually find things to say, well, and I don't, it sounds like settling, and sometimes it is. So it depends on how this is said, but I think there's times when we have to say, sometimes we can say, well, at least this. So, I don't know, you could be, I wish I would have made my son do more chores because he doesn't seem to have a very good work ethic. And, he can't keep a job for more than 6 months or a year. And then he's moving on to the next thing. And he's always in, but you know what? He's not in jail. And, that's not an illegitimate. He is working, he is trying, he is kind to people. I wish he could hold a job, but, I'm glad he's not worse. And I believe that, whatever, he's in church, he witnesses to people in all these different jobs, he's kind, and you gotta have to kind of find that. At the same, and sometimes, I mean, if it's really terrible and there's kind of nothing to find, that happens too. Then I think we even have to sometimes go back and mine the memories and say, well, I remember this happy Christmas morning, when he was 8 years old, and I'm thankful for that. And we had this joy, and we had this bright moment, and I believe God still loves him, and that he's been baptized, and I'm holding God to the fire on this. And I'm going to keep praying that he be saved, right? And, and I get it that these things aren't completely satisfying, the way we would like them to be, but they're real, and I think that's what we got to do.
Mm-hmm. So is there anything in what follows in the high priestly prayer that directs us in how we should handle the sorrow.
Well, I think the very next verse is actually, right?
Okay.
Because immediately after this, right, he says, look, and in that day, right, the day of the resurrection, you'll ask me nothing, right? I mean, I just think this is like the, Psalm 23, I shall not want. There is going to come a time when there's nothing, when nothing is going to be lacking, right? You'll be at peace. You'll actually have perfect faith, and everything will be good, and you will not have any sort of regrets or grudges or doubts or fears. This is quite a promise, right? And then until now, you've asked nothing in my name. Ask and you will receive, that your joy may be full. So, our joy is not yet full because it's tinged with all these sadnesses. But the time is coming, and it's only a little while, maybe only another 30, 40 years. I know, I shouldn't laugh, but I don't know. Sometimes I think laughing helps too, actually.
Yeah.
Gallows humor has its place.
Yeah. Well, that's why we need comedians.
Yeah.
Because they have a way of looking at the ordinary and pointing out the humor in it.
Right. Or how kind of ridiculous we're being.
Yeah.
Which we are most of the time. I wanted to talk about the epistle also for this week. Luther didn't go there, but I read in the Fred Lindemann.
Well, he does have a sermon on the epistle.
Does. Yes. I didn't read that though.
Okay.
He didn't reference it in the epistle in the sermon on the gospel. So Fred Lindemann, Sermon on the Propers for this Sunday, makes a point that I think is accurate, and that is that these Sundays after Easter, the first couple are looking back at Easter, John 20 and then the Good Shepherd. And then now there's this shift for the last part of the Easter season that's really looking forward to the Ascension and to Pentecost. That seems very clear in today's gospel where, this whole thing, in a little while you won't see me, and then you'll see me again, and then you won't, right? So you got all that stuff going on. And I think the epistle really kind of brings home this idea that I'm going to say is sort of, we have to learn how to live in the days after Pentecost, before the second coming, right? So we're the people who live after the Ascension and after Pentecost, and all we have is the whole Bible and the sacraments, which just turns out to be a whole lot more than really anybody's ever had before.
Yeah.
But we have the Bible and we have the sacraments, and we have to live in this world in these sort of difficulties and sadnesses. So the epistle is 1 Peter 2, 11 to 20. I'm just going to read it. Beloved, I beg you as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts, which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. Therefore, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme or to governors as to those who are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, as free, yet not using liberty as a cloak for vice, but as bondservants of God. Honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. Servants, be submissive to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the harsh. For this is commendable, if, because of conscience toward God, one endures grief and suffering. So I think this is a brilliant sitting along at this thing. Look, you're going to have sorrow. You are in the midst of childbirth, and it's problematic. So this is this word that's translated pilgrims and sojourners are synonyms that mean expatriates. These are outsiders, right? That you are to, right? You are outsiders in this world. You don't belong here, right? And you're traveling only through. This is not your home, and there is no place for you here. So abstain from fleshly lusts. And this is great. I love this. This is a great translation. This is perfectly stated, right? Fleshly lusts which war against not your body, but against your soul. So the spiritual warfare is carried out in the flesh, right? And it is fleshly lusts that are the sort of first thing, right? And the fleshly lusts here, I think it's all the kind of classic stuff. So to be sure, sexual desires, but also any kind of desires that have to do with appeasing this body's passions, whether that's sleeping too much, eating too much, right, drinking too much, but also then, the opinions of others. I mean, all the things that sort of attack us are. This has got to be where the things got to be fought, because what we have to the fleshly lust is always an appeal to lack, right? I mean, it's a fault. Like you're full. You've had a sufficient dinner, and it was good and it was satisfying. And the flesh says, no, it wasn't enough, right? You had two glasses of beer and it was delicious, and your heart is glad. And the flesh says, no, it's not enough. That's what it's always saying, right? And so I think it is this kind of pretending that there's lack where there is no lack, right? Or exaggerating a lack and making it kind of the thing that is actually needed to make you happy, rather than Christ, right? If I only had enough money, then I'd be happy. I mean, we should know that's not true based on experience and history and the Bible. But there is just something so stupid and broken in us that thinks it would really solve our problems, right? So the next thing then is, right, so first of all, abstain these fleshly lusts, right, which is the lusts are an expression of sorrow, a sadness over lack, and then conduct yourself honorably among the Gentiles. Now, it won't work, he says, right? I love that too. That is so funny to me. Make your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, even though, of course, they are going to deny it and they're going to speak against you as evildoers. But you should do it anyway, because they will tell the truth at the last day and they will look foolish. It's a strange argument. I mean, but it puts us, I think, in a way, we're kind of in the position of Moses and Pharaoh, right? Or God and Pharaoh, where Pharaoh isn't going to be convinced, but he is going to be exposed. And then in that same line then, because of this, submit to earthly governments and authorities, even though they suck, right? And particularly because, so here I have this, because the will of God is that you would put to silence the foolishness of the fools by good works, even though you won't until the last day. In any case, the one thing that is absolutely forbidden is that you would use liberty as a cloak for vice. And that's an amazing thing that even has to be said. But of course it does. And in these Easter weeks, so here's a great thing about Memento, carrying on beyond Lent. And that is, this idea that in these 7 weeks of Lent or of Easter, we would learn how to feast with moderation and mindfully, not as gluttons. Yeah. And boy, what a lesson that is to be learned, right? That we wouldn't say, well, I fasted now therefore I can engage in excess. Yeah. To find that balance is not easy, but it is possible, and we can learn to do better. So we should enjoy these things, right? You can think of the priestly oil, right? That the perfumed oil that the woman anoints Jesus' feet with. There's a place for these things, for luxuries even. But in moderation, shared with other people, and used mindfully. So
that was what was really interesting about the Easter disciplines that they put forward. The last time our group met and I was reading them aloud and then describing each one, they're like, oh, that's going to be hard. Like intentional snacking, not eating at the refrigerator or over the sink. They're like, oh, that's going to be hard. And it's sort of interesting how, okay, I can, cut myself off from these things, but now I'm going to have these things back, but they're going to be in a different context, and they're going to be shared, and it's not going to be selfishly motivated. It's going to be outwardly focused almost.
Yeah. It's going to be an expression of gratitude and joy, not of pleasure in the same way.
Self-satisfaction, yeah.
Yes, I love this. This is a phrase I picked up from Ben Mays, and I use it a lot. This, he talks about the goal of he's talking about the marriage bed, that the goal is not to maximize pleasure. And I think that's so important and so helpful when we think about this. We're never trying to maximize pleasure. That's just a kind of selfish indulgence, to make this thing as ridiculous as possible in a way. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to do is be reverent, So you're going to eat a piece of chocolate reverently, right? And that means, not over the kitchen sink, jamming it in your mouth as fast as you can, right? Trying to keep other people from having it, right? Yeah. Or you could think of the mothers that hide in their pantries, eating cookies and stuff because their kids are driving them crazy. I'm not speaking from the experience of any mothers that I know.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know any of those either. But it is something that we have to be intentional about and learn to do.
Yes. Yeah. And I think this is a great text for it, right? We have liberty to eat cookies. They don't have to be healthy, right? Mm-hmm. We don't have to, the standard is this healthy. It can be received in its goodness and in its joy. Now, you might choose not to eat it because it's not healthy or, but it's liberty, so we're not judging other people. I'm not going to look at you with derision because you're eating cookies that have corn syrup in them and, whatever else that, I think is bad. Look, that's the liberty part, you make your own choices, but I am going to look upon you with derision if you eat a whole, box of them. Yeah. And I am going to tell you, because I'm your brother, that's too much, buddy. Yeah. That's not savoring. That's not mindful. That's not intentional. That's not joyful. And it's, so yeah. So this is a great text to say we have real liberty to receive these things, to exercise reverence, to engage in gratitude, in joy, to receive the gifts of God. But, we're not, I was thinking about this with Romans. In fact, I was thinking about, they're feasting with like the vomitoriums, right? Yeah. And then the gross stuff they eat is just all about being as extravagant and stupid as possible, dipping, baby partridges into honey and whatever, just all kinds of awful, because they're just trying to do anything in excess. Mm-hmm. And it's totally pagan. And it's actually not attractive. It's gross, lying down to eat. That's gross. And, it just doesn't even, so I think that, there's a kind of contrast between the way that the pagans engage, or like these, stupid Norwegians with their cups that are made out of horn. So you have to drink the whole thing and you can't set it down. Right. We think that's sort of funny, but it's not actually. That's terrible. Right. That's not about moderation and savoring. You shouldn't be, shooting beers. Right. Mm-hmm. That's this kind of behavior that's a somebody say, well, I'm a Christian, I can do this. No, that's a cloak for vice. Yeah. And it's irreverent because it doesn't actually appreciate the beer. Mm-hmm. So this is a great text, I think, for this. And then you get this, right? But you're actually, and I like the translation. So I like that fleshly lust. Pilgrims and sojourners, I don't know. But, and then I actually like the word submit here rather than subordinate, even though it is hupotasso again. But here, I think in context in English, submit actually makes more sense. That we have to actually submit to imperfect governments and even wicked authorities, right? Cruel, harsh masters. We have to recognize the imperfections of and the failures of those who are over us, and yet at the same time still obey them whenever and wherever possible. And the temptation for chafing there is so great. And I think, again, to turn the other cheek. And then, because I love this too, what precedes that. Honor all people, right? That means the bad ones also, right? Love the brotherhood, right? We owe more to one another than simply honor. And then, of course, fear God, and then honor kings. And then, right, look, you're going to have some bad masters, or even good masters are going to have bad days. And what are you going to do in this world? You're going to suffer, and you're going to endure grief as a Christian who believes it's temporary, right? Ultimately, that's the point of the little while. It's not eternal. And the time is coming when your joy will be full.
So it's submit yourselves to every ordinance.
Yeah. Obviously,
for
not
the Lord's sake.
Yeah, not to. Obviously, we obey God and not men. We're not gonna submit to immoral orders, but we are going to submit, and this is maybe more difficult. We are going to submit sometimes to foolish orders. Mm-hmm. Unjust orders. These things. Well, the government wants more of my income than is reasonable, and will do stupid things with it. Well, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and so we have to suffer a lot of these kinds of things, and it is difficult, obviously, but if you take it away from the kind of government thing and you bring it to the home, there is a submission to an imperfect, foolish husband that I think does bring great joy. And isn't always so difficult. There are times when it is, and there are times when remonstrance is necessary. But then there are also times to let him lead, right? Mm-hmm. And to just go, well, maybe this is stupid. Maybe it's going to have consequences down the road for our finances. But he's the man, and I'm going to let him have it. And it's kind of amazing, in a way, what can happen in that environment, and how the joy can return to a marriage, and how he can actually start to listen again. I do think it's fair to say that what men sort of psychologically need the most is respect.
Yeah,
and they do feel that more deeply than women, and what women feel more deeply typically is affection. They want to be liked, and they want to be thought well of, and they want us to be kind to them and gentle. But men typically, it's a continuum, and I'm not saying they're exclusive, but so anyway, to learn how to do that, and the other side of that, the important passage here, which is also in 1 Peter, is to not provoke your children, right? So there is this, when you're exercising authority, to not be petty, to not be obnoxious, to be gentle and kind, reasonable, right, towards them. And these things are difficult, but when they're done when they're undergirded by grace, right, by the forgiveness of sins, and they're done in faith with this confidence that God actually joined us together, and means for us to work through this, things can get better, and things can get better, happier, more joyful. Never easy, I would say, and there are seasons when it can be very, very difficult. But there are seasons when it's light and it's fun, right?
Mm-hmm. So in verses 11 and 12, you've got the contradiction to fleshly lusts is honorable conduct and good works, but both of those are a form of kalos,
Yeah.
not agathos. So what does that tell us in terms of then what follows the subordination or submission? Because that all seems to be speaking about something that's orderly.
Right. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It all has to do about, what is fitting, right? What is actually appropriate for right. So kalos is the word beautiful, or appropriate or fitting, right? So something that's beautiful, a beautiful rose petal is a lousy windshield, So it's fitting to its purpose and it's beautiful for what it is, right? In that it's true to its essence. So that's what goodness is and what beauty is. And beauty is a little bit more in that beauty also has an element of surprise in it. But, this whole thing's kind of intertwined. And that's what the word kalos really is invoking, right? So it's not just that it's morally good, but it's actually fit. So, right, so that your conduct would be appropriate, right? That you would treat a child different than you would treat a teenager. And you would treat a teenager differently than you treat your wife. And you treat your wife differently than you treat a female coworker, right? And I mean, and on it goes. And so that has to do with the honorable conduct is defined by the relationship and the situation. And then really it's the same thing that your good works, right? These are actually fitting to your office and your position and the relationship and your duties. So that's where, and then of course it's pretty explicit then when you get into, submitting then to every ordinance of man, right? I'm not obeying the laws of Greece. I'm obeying the laws of Indiana. And, so it's not, when we say every ordinance of man, we don't mean all simultaneously, right? But to it has to do with the one, where God has placed you. So, and in this, there's going to be grief and suffering, right? These things are not going to be, light and easy, but I'm saying that they can at times be light and easy because not that they're not they can be light at least. I don't think it's ever going to be a great joy to do the dishes. These are things that just have to be done, but there can become a satisfaction in it and a kind of placing things back into order, being prepared for the next meal, recognizing the sort of goodness of the act itself as a service to God and to neighbor can give it dignity that does lighten it and can actually infuse it with joy. I do know people that like doing the dishes. I'm not one of them. But, I've asked people about this, and this is precisely the people that like doing the dishes. That's what they say they like about it. The sense that they're doing something constructive, it's sort of measurable, they can see the progress, and it feels good to them to have things clean. Yeah. And I think those are all legit.
So how does that, how do we translate that to doing so with our souls?
Well, again, I think, what are our souls for? Right? So, because it has to do with what's appropriate for our souls. And what's appropriate for our souls is to praise God. I mean, you could say more than that, but I think that's actually the ultimate statement of what we were created for. That is to hear God's word and to believe it and to respond to it in kind, right? So, what are we doing? So again, in terms of our souls, when we are chafing under what we perceive of as a lack, right? I need more food. I don't have enough. I don't have enough pleasure. That's a rebellion as opposed to, Jesus giving thanks on the night in which he is betrayed, going off to the mountains to pray, right? He's not going off to, and we don't really have we never have Jesus engaging in anything that we would call recreation, right? He never plays cornhole. As far as we know, right? He doesn't.
Maybe pickleball.
So it is. It's something I've thought about. I think he did. I think he did engage in those things, and I think he probably.
How could he not? How could they not have games that they didn't play as they? It it was too dark to do this or that, and so they were all.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine that.
Right. I agree. I think he would have. I think that sometimes sometimes reverence requires play. So the kid rolls the. You're sitting in the living room talking to someone, and his kid rolls the truck into your foot, from across the room. What are you supposed to do?
Pretend like it really hurts.
Or roll it back, right?
Yeah,
something
you can do
you're
that
supposed
too,
to
I suppose.
But you're supposed to respond to it, and it's a bid for attention from him, and he wants to play with you, and he wants to see that you understand the game, or you're going to engage in a game that he can understand by pretending it hurts. You're supposed to, right? That's actually what reverence requires, because he's a human being, and Jesus had to have done that. I think. It's not recorded. I would like it to have been, but it wasn't. I mean, we do have him playing with delighting in the Leviathan as they play. So you do have that passage. But anyway, I would say that the primary purpose of our souls is not play; it's praise.
So what do you make then? Going back to John, when he's like. So you have sorrow now, but I will see you again. He doesn't say you will see me again.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, is there anything there?
I think he's just talking about the resurrection when,
Gotcha.
And I think this is right. He's going to actually see us with his human eyeballs. We're going to see him with our human eyeballs, right? Job style. This is actually going to be we're going to know one another, and be known as we are known. So I don't think it means, in other words, that he's going to see us, but we're not going to see him. Right? I mean, I think it's going to be this. And I think that the fact that he puts it into the first person is kind of surprising, right? The most natural thing would be, well, you're not going to see me and then you will see me. So I think when he says, I'm going to see you, it actually indicates that he wants to see us. Which is sort of right. He is. This is this thing about when the mother has the baby in her lap, and she says, which they all say this, right? Open up your eyes so that I can see you. I love that. I think that's so hilarious, right?
Yeah.
Why? I mean, look, the mother's eyes are open. She's seeing fine. The baby opening his eyes doesn't change anything in terms of what the mother sees, but yes, it does. Right?
Yeah.
Because what the mother wants is that connection, and she wants to look into that baby's eyes, and part of that is she wants that baby looking back, right? That's why the baby's eyes need to be open.
So this is face-to-face interaction.
Yes, that's what he's saying.
So he's saying I will see you, and you will be looking at my face, meaning we're going to be looking at each other.
Yes, that's what he means. We're going to see.
That makes more sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah, he actually, I mean, and that's like, why in the world does he want to look at us? He does, though. He totally does.
So typically we don't always look forward to this section. I don't know why, it's part of the Bible, but because we spend so much time in it and out of order. What do you think you're going to focus on this year?
I think I'm going to preach on the epistle, and I'm going to.
Okay.
I mean, I'm going to bring in the gospel, but I think I'm going to talk about how is it that we are to live with sorrow, right? We have sorrows now. We are fighting against the flesh now. We don't belong in this world, but it's not in the epistle. But make a joy. This is Jubilate Sunday. Right? So how do we rejoice in the midst of sorrows? In what do we rejoice when things are so terrible? And how do we learn to live by faith that is, and then, that Luther thing about the kind of mingledness, right? That, our joys aren't as perfect as we would like, and yet they are good. And our sorrows aren't quite as devastating as the flesh would have us believe. So how do we kind of come at all of this with more moderation and learn to really rejoice and in actual faith and reverence?
Yeah, it seems like even when we are going through good times, we're waiting for the other shoe to fall.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we don't really enjoy the good times.
Right.
And when we're going through the bad times, we're thinking about how bad it is, not how, what God is going to do with it or how good he's been in the past.
Right. No, that's exactly right. Yeah, I think and so we're being robbed, actually, and sometimes robbing ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And right. So how do we? So all of that.
The devil is called the thief.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. No, that's good. Well, thank you for your time, Dave, and we will pick up then with the next part of these texts next time.
All right. Thanks, Jason.